In the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan, where loyalty means everything and betrayal costs lives, Commander Jake Morrison discovered that sometimes your greatest enemy isn't the one shooting at you from across the valley. Sometimes, it's the men standing right beside you. What happened on that blood-soaked ridge in 2018 would shatter everything he believed about brotherhood, honor, and survival. But in his darkest hour, when death seemed certain and hope had abandoned him, salvation would come from the most unexpected source, a ghost in the mountains who never missed her target. The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain as Commander Jake Morrison adjusted his binoculars for the third time in 10 minutes. Something felt wrong. In his 15 years as a Navy SEAL, he had developed an instinct for danger that had kept him and his men alive through countless missions. Today, that instinct was screaming. The mission briefing had been straightforward enough. Intelligence had located a high-value target in a compound nestled between two mountain peaks in the Kunar province. Abdul Rashid Nazir, a Taliban commander responsible for orchestrating attacks that had killed dozens of American soldiers, was reportedly meeting with foreign fighters to plan a major offensive. The team's job was to capture or eliminate Nazir and gather any intelligence they could find. Morrison's team consisted of 8 elite SEALs, men he had trained with and fought alongside for years. There was Rodriguez, the team's communications specialist whose quick thinking had saved them during a firefight in Kandahar. Thompson, their explosives expert, who could disarm a bomb blindfolded and had the scars to prove his dedication. Williams, the medic whose steady hands had pulled more wounded soldiers from the brink of death than anyone could count. These were men he trusted with his life, men who had sworn the same oath he had, but as they moved through the treacherous mountain paths in the pre-dawn darkness, Morrison couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The usual easy banter was missing. Rodriguez avoided eye contact during the radio checks. Thompson's responses were clipped and professional, lacking his typical dry humor. Williams seemed nervous, constantly adjusting his medical kit and checking his weapon. The plan was simple in concept, but dangerous in execution. They would approach the compound from 3 directions, with Morrison leading the main assault team, while 2 smaller groups provided overwatch and blocked potential escape routes. The intelligence suggested minimal resistance, but Morrison had learned never to trust intelligence completely. The mountains had a way of turning simple operations into deadly nightmares. As they reached their final staging area, a rocky outcrop about half a mile from the target compound, Morrison called for a final equipment check. The men went through their gear with practiced efficiency, but he noticed the glances they exchanged when they thought he wasn't looking. Subtle nods, meaningful looks, the kind of silent communication that comes from years of working together. Under normal circumstances, this would have been reassuring. Today, it made his blood run cold. Rodriguez's radio crackled to life with an update from command. The drone overhead had confirmed movement in the compound, and thermal imaging showed at least 6 individuals inside the main building. Morrison studied the feed on Rodriguez's screen, memorizing the layout and identifying potential threats. The compound consisted of 3 buildings arranged in a rough triangle, with the main structure housing their primary target. As they prepared to move into their final assault positions, Morrison gathered his team around him. These men had followed him through hell and back, and he had never lost a single one under his command. His perfect record was something he took pride in, but it was more than just professional accomplishment. These weren't just soldiers under his command, they were his brothers. "Listen up," Morrison said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We've done this type of operation dozens of times. We go in clean, we get our target, and we all go home. Nobody takes unnecessary risks, nobody plays hero. We watch each other's backs like always." The men nodded, but Morrison noticed that several of them couldn't meet his eyes. Thompson was fidgeting with his equipment, and Rodriguez kept checking his watch as if he was waiting for something. Williams looked pale, which was unusual for a man who had performed emergency surgery in active combat zones. As they began their approach to the compound, Morrison took point with 3 men, while the others moved to their designated positions. The path was treacherous, with loose rocks and steep drops that could send a man tumbling hundreds of feet to his death. They moved in single file, each man responsible for the safety of the one behind him. The first sign that something was seriously wrong came when they were about 200 yards from the compound. Morrison's radio should have crackled with status reports from his overwatch teams, but there was only silence. He tried to raise Rodriguez on the comm but got no response. The hair on the back of his neck stood up as he realized that his support teams had gone silent. He signaled for his assault team to take cover behind a cluster of boulders and tried his radio again. This time, Rodriguez responded, but his voice sounded strange, almost mechanical. "Command, this is Rodriguez. Primary assault team is in position. Target confirmed in main building. Proceeding with operation as planned." Morrison frowned. That wasn't the code phrase they had agreed upon, and Rodriguez knew it. Something was very wrong, but he couldn't figure out what. His training told him to abort the mission, but his sense of duty to complete the objective and protect his men kept him moving forward. As they approached the compound's outer perimeter, Morrison noticed that the sentries they had spotted on the drone footage were nowhere to be seen. The place looked abandoned, but thermal imaging had clearly shown multiple heat signatures. He made the decision to proceed with caution, trusting in his team's training and his own instincts to get them through whatever lay ahead. The assault went according to plan at first. They breached the compound's outer wall without resistance and began their approach to the main building. Morrison led his team through a series of rooms, clearing each one methodically. But something felt off about the whole operation. The rooms looked lived in, but there was no sign of the occupants they had been tracking. It wasn't until they reached the main room that Morrison realized they had walked into a trap. But it wasn't the Taliban who had set it. As he pushed open the door to what should have been Nazir's location, Morrison found himself staring down the barrels of 3 assault rifles. Behind them stood Rodriguez, Thompson, and Williams, their faces grim but determined. The room was empty except for his own men, who had somehow gotten there ahead of him, despite being assigned to overwatch positions. What the hell is going on? Morrison demanded, his own weapon raised but not quite pointing at his teammates. Everything he had trained for, everything he believed about loyalty and brotherhood, told him this couldn't be happening. Rodriguez stepped forward, his rifle steady, and aimed at Morrison's chest. "I'm sorry, Commander. Orders are orders." Morrison's mind raced as he tried to process what was happening. "Whose orders? What are you talking about?" Thompson spoke up, his voice tight with what might have been regret. "Word came down from way up the chain. You've become a liability, Morrison. Too many questions, too much digging into operations you should have left alone." The pieces began falling into place in Morrison's mind. Over the past few months, he had started noticing irregularities in their missions. Equipment that went missing, intelligence that seemed too convenient, operations that didn't quite add up. He had started asking questions, making inquiries through unofficial channels. Someone high up in the command structure hadn't liked his curiosity. "You're talking about treason," Morrison said, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. "You're talking about murdering your commanding officer." Williams looked sick, but he kept his weapon trained on Morrison. "It's not personal, sir. It's just business. There are bigger things at play here than you understand." Morrison felt the world tilting around him as he realized that the men he had trusted with his life, the men he would have died for, had sold him out. But the worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the cold, calculated way they were going about it. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment decision. This had been planned. "How long?" Morrison asked. "How long have you been planning this?" Rodriguez checked his watch again, and Morrison realized he had been waiting for something specific. "The drone lost visual contact with your position about 5 minutes ago. Technical malfunction. By the time it's restored, you'll have been killed in action during the assault on a Taliban compound. Tragic loss, but these things happen in war." Morrison calculated his options quickly. 3 men with automatic weapons had him dead to rights in an enclosed space. Even if he could take one of them down, the others would finish him before he could react. But he was a Navy SEAL, trained to think clearly under pressure and never give up, no matter how hopeless the situation seemed. "The rest of the team?" Morrison asked, hoping against hope that not all of his men had turned against him. "They're securing the perimeter," Thompson replied. "They think you're in here interrogating prisoners. They'll be told that you died heroically, and they'll believe it because they trusted you." Ah. The irony wasn't lost on Morrison. The men who still believed in him would mourn his death, while the men who had betrayed him would be celebrated for completing a successful mission. He wondered how many other operations had been compromised. How many good soldiers had died because of whatever conspiracy his team had become part of. Rodriguez raised his rifle to his shoulder, preparing to fire. "Any last words, Commander?" Morrison looked each of his betrayers in the eye, memorizing their faces. If by some miracle he survived this, he would make sure they faced justice. "Yeah," he said quietly. "You forgot one thing." "What's that?" Rodriguez asked, finger tightening on the trigger. "I never told you where the real exit strategy was." Before any of them could react, Morrison dove toward a window he had spotted during his initial scan of the room. The glass exploded around him as he crashed through it, falling 15 feet to the rocky ground below. Gunfire erupted behind him as his former teammates tried to finish what they had started. Morrison hit the ground hard, feeling something crack in his ribs, but adrenaline kept him moving. He rolled behind a low stone wall just as bullets began chipping away at the rocks around him. His radio was damaged in the fall, cutting him off from any potential support. He was alone in hostile territory, wounded, and being hunted by the very men who were supposed to have his back. As he caught his breath and assessed his injuries, Morrison could hear Rodriguez coordinating with the rest of the team over the radio. They were spinning a story about taking fire from multiple positions, about the commander being pinned down and requiring immediate support. The other SEALs, the ones who still believed in their mission and their leadership, would come running to help. They would walk into the same trap that had snared Morrison. He had to warn them, but his radio was dead and he had no way to reach them. Worse, he was now being hunted by some of the most highly trained soldiers in the world. They knew his tactics, his training, his weaknesses. They had worked alongside him for years and knew exactly how he would think and react in this situation. Morrison began moving away from the compound, staying low and using the rocky terrain for cover. Every step sent pain shooting through his injured ribs, and he could feel blood seeping from cuts caused by the broken glass. But he had survived worse conditions and kept going. The question was whether he could stay ahead of his pursuers long enough to figure out his next move. Behind him, he could hear his former teammates organizing a search. They had night vision equipment, superior numbers, and intimate knowledge of his capabilities. They also had the advantage of being able to coordinate their efforts while he was completely isolated. The smart tactical decision would be to eliminate him quickly and quietly, then return to base with their cover story intact. As Morrison made his way through the treacherous mountain terrain, he couldn't help but think about the families of his betrayers. Rodriguez had 2 young daughters who sent him drawings that he kept in his gear. Thompson's wife was expecting their first child. Williams supported his aging parents and had been planning to propose to his girlfriend when they returned from deployment. These weren't evil men in the traditional sense. They were soldiers who had made a terrible choice for reasons Morrison couldn't yet understand. But regardless of their motivations, they had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. They had violated the most sacred trust that exists between soldiers, the promise to have each other's backs no matter what. That betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound Morrison had ever received. As the sun began to set behind the mountain peaks, Morrison realized he was facing a night that would test every survival skill he had ever learned. He was injured, alone, and being hunted by men who knew him better than he knew himself. But he was also a Navy SEAL, trained to survive against impossible odds. The mountains of Afghanistan had claimed many good soldiers over the years, but Jake Morrison had no intention of becoming another casualty. Not today, and not like this. He would survive, he would escape, and eventually he would get his revenge on the men who had betrayed everything they were supposed to stand for. But first, he had to make it through the night. The Afghan mountains at night were a special kind of hell. Temperatures dropped 30 degrees as soon as the sun disappeared behind the peaks, and the rocky terrain became a maze of shadows and death traps. Morrison had been moving for 3 hours, using every stealth technique he knew to stay ahead of his pursuers. His ribs screamed with each breath, and the cuts from his dramatic exit through the window had stopped bleeding but left his shirt stiff with dried blood. Rodriguez and the others were good. Too good. They had split into 2 teams and were systematically sweeping the mountainside, using their night vision equipment and intimate knowledge of Morrison's tactics to anticipate his movements. Twice he had been forced to change direction when he heard them getting too close. Once, Thompson had passed within 20 feet of his hiding spot without detecting him. But Morrison knew his luck wouldn't hold forever. The worst part was the radio chatter he could occasionally pick up on his damaged communication device. His loyal teammates, the ones who hadn't been part of the conspiracy, were genuinely concerned about their missing commander. They had been told that Morrison was trapped somewhere in the compound and that Rodriguez's team was conducting a rescue operation. Their voices carried real worry as they coordinated their search efforts, having no idea they were helping to hunt down the man they were trying to save. Morrison tried to reach them several times, but his radio could only receive, not transmit. The fall had damaged something critical in the circuitry, leaving him completely isolated. He was effectively a ghost moving through the mountains, cut off from any form of support or backup. As he navigated a particularly treacherous section of loose rock, Morrison's foot slipped and sent a small avalanche of stones tumbling down the mountainside. The noise echoed through the canyon below, and he immediately heard Rodriguez's team change direction toward his position. They moved with deadly efficiency, cutting off his escape routes and forcing him higher into the mountains. Morrison realized that his pursuers were herding him towards something. They weren't just trying to catch him, they were driving him to a specific location. His tactical mind began analyzing their movements, and he didn't like what he discovered. They were pushing him toward a dead end, a section of the mountain where the terrain would force him into the open with nowhere to run. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Rodriguez knew that Morrison would try to gain the high ground to observe their movements and plan his next move. By forcing him upward, they were actually limiting his options while making him believe he was gaining an advantage. It was exactly the kind of psychological manipulation that made Rodriguez such an effective soldier. Morrison had two choices: continue climbing into the trap or try to double back through territory his hunters had already secured. Both options were dangerous, but staying put wasn't an option at all. He chose to keep climbing, hoping to find some tactical advantage that Rodriguez hadn't anticipated. The path became increasingly difficult as he ascended. Loose shells shifted under his feet with every step, and the thin mountain air made his labored breathing even more painful with his injured ribs. But Morrison pushed forward, driven by a combination of survival instinct and burning anger at the betrayal he had suffered. It was near midnight when Morrison first saw the muzzle flash. The bullet passed so close to his head that he felt the heat of its passage, and the crack of the rifle shot echoed through the mountains like thunder. Morrison dove for cover behind a boulder, his heart pounding as he tried to locate the shooter. The shot had come from above and to his left, from a position that should have been impossible for any of his pursuers to reach. Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio frequencies. "Did anyone have eyes on the commander? Someone just took a shot." Thompson responded immediately. "Negative. We're still 200 meters below his last known position." Morrison's blood ran cold as he realized what had happened. There was another player in this deadly game, someone who wasn't part of Rodriguez's team, or his loyal SEALs. The shot had been meant for him, fired by someone with the skill and equipment to track him through the darkness and nearly put a bullet through his head from an impossible range. Williams's voice joined the radio chatter, tension evident in his tone. "Command, are we sure there aren't any other friendlies in this area? That shot came from a sniper position we don't have covered." Rodriguez's response was immediate and telling. "Negative. We're the only authorized personnel in this sector. Could be Taliban fighters who heard the commotion, but Morrison knew better. Taliban fighters didn't have the kind of advanced optics and training required to nearly put a bullet through his head from that distance in complete darkness. This was someone else entirely. Someone with military-grade equipment and the skill to use it effectively." Morrison began moving again, staying low and using the rocky terrain to break up his silhouette. He had gone perhaps 50 yards when the second shot rang out, this one striking the rock just inches from his left shoulder. Whoever was hunting him had adjusted for his movement and nearly scored a direct hit. The shooter was good, better than good. The kind of marksman who could put rounds exactly where they wanted them, from distances that would challenge most military snipers. Morrison found himself in the impossible position of being hunted by his own men from below and an unknown sniper from above. Rodriguez's team had heard the second shot as well, and their radio chatter revealed their confusion. They were realizing that someone else was involved in the hunt, someone who hadn't been part of their original plan. Morrison could hear the uncertainty in their voices as they tried to figure out what was happening. "Thompson, can you get a fix on that sniper position?" Rodriguez asked. "Working on it, but whoever it is has excellent concealment. Professional-grade stuff." Morrison smiled grimly as he listened to his betrayers struggle with an unexpected complication. But his satisfaction was short-lived when he realized that the unknown sniper was still trying to kill him. He needed to find cover and fast before the next shot found its mark. As he scrambled across a section of open ground, Morrison caught a glimpse of movement on a ridge about 800 meters away. It was just a flash, barely visible even to his trained eyes, but it confirmed his suspicions. The sniper was repositioning, probably to get a better angle for the killing shot. Morrison's tactical mind was working overtime, trying to understand the dynamics of his situation. Rodriguez's team wanted him dead, but were trying to make it look like he died in combat. An unknown sniper also wanted him dead, but didn't seem concerned about how it looked. Both groups were hunting him, but they weren't working together. The third shot came without warning, striking the ground between Morrison's feet and sending rock fragments flying. This time, however, Morrison noticed something that made his blood freeze. The bullet hadn't been aimed at him. It had been aimed at the path ahead of him, blocking his route toward a section of the mountain where Rodriguez's team was positioned. The sniper wasn't trying to kill him. The sniper was hurting him. Morrison changed direction immediately, moving away from both the path the sniper was blocking and the area where Rodriguez's team was waiting. But as he did, another shot rang out, this one striking directly in front of his new route. Once again, the bullet was placed to redirect his movement rather than end his life. Someone was playing a very dangerous game of chess, with Morrison as an unwilling piece. The unknown sniper had the skill to kill him anytime they wanted, but instead was manipulating his movements across the mountainside. But why? What possible reason could anyone have for keeping him alive while appearing to hunt him? Morrison found himself being pushed toward a section of the mountain he hadn't explored, a steep-walled canyon that offered limited escape routes. Every time he tried to deviate from the path the sniper seemed to want him to take, another perfectly placed shot would redirect him back on course. Rodriguez's team was becoming increasingly frustrated as they tried to coordinate their hunt while avoiding the unknown sniper. Their radio chatter revealed growing paranoia as they realized that someone else was controlling the situation. "This is getting out of hand," William said over the radio. "We need to abort and regroup." Rodriguez's response was sharp. "Negative. We finished this tonight. Too much is at stake to walk away now." Thompson's voice carried doubt. "But we don't know who else is out here. This could be some kind of setup." "It's not a setup," Rodriguez replied. "Just some unlucky local fighter who picked the wrong night to go hunting. We deal with Morrison first, then handle the sniper." Morrison almost laughed at Rodriguez's misreading of the situation. This wasn't some random Taliban fighter with a hunting rifle. This was someone with military training, advanced equipment, and a specific agenda. But Rodriguez's arrogance was working in Morrison's favor, keeping his pursuers focused on their original plan instead of adapting to the new threat. As Morrison followed the path the mysterious sniper seemed to be directing him towards, he began to notice something strange about the terrain. The route he was being forced to take was actually quite clever from a tactical standpoint. It provided good cover from observation while offering multiple escape routes if needed. Someone with intimate knowledge of the mountain geography was guiding him toward a defensible position. The canyon entrance appeared ahead of him, a narrow gap between two towering rock walls. Morrison hesitated, knowing that entering the canyon could trap him if Rodriguez's team managed to seal the exit. But another shot, placed precisely where it needed to be to block his retreat, convinced him that he had little choice. As he entered the canyon, Morrison was surprised to find that it opened into a much larger space than it appeared from the outside. The walls rose steeply on all sides, but there were numerous caves and rock formations that provided excellent concealment. More importantly, he noticed signs that someone had been using this location as a base of operations. There were subtle indicators that only someone with his training would recognize. Scratches on the rocks where equipment had been positioned, areas where the ground had been carefully cleared of debris, and most tellingly, the remains of a small fire that had been expertly concealed from aerial observation.
Morrison was examining these signs when a voice spoke from the shadows behind him. "Commander Morrison."
He spun around, his weapon raised, to find himself face to face with the last person he had expected to see in the mountains of Afghanistan.
Standing in the darkness, barely visible even to his trained eyes, was a woman in full tactical gear. She was small in stature, but carried herself with the confidence of someone who belonged in this environment. Her face was painted with camouflage and her equipment was state-of-the-art military issue. "Who are you?" Morrison demanded, keeping his weapon trained on her while his eyes searched for additional threats. The woman stepped forward slightly, just enough for Morrison to see her more clearly in the moonlight. She appeared to be in her early 30s, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to take in everything around her with calculating precision. "Someone who's been watching your situation develop," she replied, her voice calm and professional, "and someone who might be able to help you get out of this mess alive." Morrison didn't lower his weapon. "Why should I trust you? For all I know, you're the one who's been taking shots at me." The woman smiled, but there was no humor in it. "If I wanted you dead, Commander, you would have been dead 3 hours ago when you fell through that window. I've had a clear shot at you at least a dozen times since then. So you're the sniper, among other things." She gestured toward the canyon around them. "And I've been directing you here because it's the only place in these mountains where we can have a conversation without your former teammates listening in." Morrison processed this information quickly. The woman's equipment, her positioning, her intimate knowledge of the terrain, and her apparent ability to track both him and Rodriguez's team suggested she was far more than just a random observer. "What do you want?" Morrison asked. "To keep you alive," she replied, "and to make sure that the men who betrayed you don't get away with what they've done." Before Morrison could respond, Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio frequencies, closer than it had been before. His pursuers had found the canyon entrance and were preparing to follow him inside. The woman seemed to hear the radio chatter as well, and her expression became more serious. "We need to move. This position won't be secure much longer. I'm not going anywhere with you until you tell me who you are and what you're really after," Morrison said. The woman looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing her options. Finally, she seemed to reach a decision. Staff Sergeant Sarah Chen, United States Army. Formerly of the 75th Ranger Regiment, currently assigned to a classified unit that investigates irregularities in special operations. Morrison's weapon didn't waver, but his expression showed surprise. Military intelligence? Something like that. Chen began moving toward the back of the canyon, motioning for Morrison to follow. We've been tracking unusual activities in several special operations units, including your team. What happened to you tonight wasn't random, Commander. It was part of something much larger. Morrison hesitated, torn between his training that told him not to trust anyone and his desperate need for allies. Rodriguez's team was getting closer, and he was running out of options. How do I know you're telling the truth? Morrison asked. Chen turned back to face him, and for the first time, her professional mask slipped slightly. Because 3 months ago, the same thing happened to my unit. My teammates tried to kill me during what was supposed to be a routine mission in Syria. The only difference is that I saw it coming and was better prepared. She paused, and Morrison could see pain in her eyes despite the camouflage paint. I've been hunting the people responsible ever since. Your situation tonight gave me the opportunity to gather evidence and maybe save a good soldier's life at the same time. Rodriguez's voice came over the radio again, much closer now. Morrison could hear movement at the canyon entrance, and he knew his time was running out. Chen was offering him his only chance at survival. But trusting her meant betting his life on a complete stranger. But as Morrison looked into her eyes, he saw something he recognized. The same sense of betrayal and burning need for justice that was consuming him. Whatever Chen's true story was, her anger at being betrayed by her own people was genuine. All right, Morrison said finally, lowering his weapon slightly. Lead the way. Chen nodded and began moving toward what Morrison had assumed was a solid rock wall. As she approached it, however, he realized that it was actually a carefully concealed entrance to a passage that led deeper into the mountain. Where does this lead? Morrison asked as they entered the narrow passage. 2 answers, Chen replied, and hopefully to a way to make the people who did this pay for what they've done. As they disappeared into the darkness of the mountain passage, Rodriguez's team entered the canyon behind them, unaware that their prey had just found a very dangerous ally. The passage through the mountain was longer and more complex than Morrison had expected. Chen moved through the darkness with the confidence of someone who had mapped every inch of these tunnels, using a small red-filtered flashlight to navigate the twisting path. The air was thin and cold, and Morrison's injured ribs protested with every step, but he pushed forward, driven by curiosity about this mysterious woman who had appeared at exactly the right moment to save his life. After what felt like an hour of careful movement through the underground maze, they emerged into a natural cave that had been converted into a sophisticated surveillance and communication center. Multiple monitors displayed feeds from cameras positioned throughout the mountain range, and sophisticated radio equipment hummed quietly in the background. Maps covered one wall, marked with positions and movement patterns that Morrison recognized as tactical intelligence. Impressive setup, Morrison said, looking around the cave with professional appreciation. How long have you been operating out of here? Chen began powering up additional equipment, her movements efficient and practiced. 6 weeks. I've been tracking your unit's activities since intelligence suggested they might be compromised. Morrison examined the maps more closely and felt his blood run cold. Marked on them were the locations of every mission his unit had conducted over the past 3 months, along with detailed notes about casualties, objectives, and outcomes. But what made his stomach turn was the pattern he could see emerging from the data. Son of a bitch, Morrison whispered. You've been tracking us because our missions have been getting people killed. Chen nodded grimly as she activated the main communications array. Not just killed, specifically targeted. Every operation your unit has conducted in the past 4 months has resulted in the elimination of people who are investigating irregularities in special operations funding and logistics. She pulled up a file on one of the computers, displaying a list of names and photographs. Morrison recognized several of them as targets his team had been ordered to eliminate or capture. Men who had been described as Taliban commanders or foreign fighters, but who Chen's intelligence suggested were actually investigating corruption within the American military structure. Abdul Rashid Nazir, Chen said, pointing to a photograph on the screen. The man you were supposed to capture or kill tonight. He's not a Taliban commander. He's a former Afghan military officer who was gathering evidence of American weapons being sold to insurgent groups. Morrison stared at the photograph, his mind reeling as he processed the implications. You're saying we've been assassinating witnesses and investigators while being told they were enemy combatants? That's exactly what I'm saying. Chen pulled up additional files, each one containing evidence of American military equipment being sold to hostile forces. Someone very high up in the command structure has been running weapons to insurgent groups and using special operations teams to eliminate anyone who gets too close to the truth. Morrison felt sick as he thought about all the men he had killed in the name of duty and patriotism. How many of them had been innocent people trying to expose corruption? How many families had been destroyed because he and his team had been unknowingly working as assassins for traitors? "How long have you known?" Morrison asked. Chen's expression was grim. "My unit stumbled onto part of this 3 months ago when we were investigating missing weapons shipments. We started asking the wrong questions and got too close to the truth. That's when my teammates received their orders to eliminate me during what was supposed to be a routine training exercise." She activated another screen, showing surveillance footage of Rodriguez's team coordinating with unknown individuals at a remote airfield. Morrison watched in horror as his men handed over military equipment to people who were clearly not American military personnel.
Rodriguez, Thompson, and Williams aren't just traitors, Chen explained.
They're active participants in the operation. They've been selling advanced military equipment to the highest bidder and using their positions to eliminate anyone who threatens their business. Morrison's hands clenched into fists as he watched the footage. These men had shared meals with him, fought alongside him, attended the funerals of fallen comrades. They had sworn an oath to protect America and its interests, and instead they had been betraying everything they claimed to stand for. "What about the others?" Morrison asked. "My other team members who weren't part of tonight's betrayal?" Chen's expression softened slightly. "Clean, as far as we can tell. Rodriguez only brought in people he could control completely. The others have been kept in the dark about the real nature of your recent operations." A new sound echoed through the cave, and Chen immediately began monitoring the surveillance feeds. On one of the screens, Morrison could see Rodriguez's team systematically searching the canyon where he had been captured. They were being thorough, but they hadn't found the concealed entrance to the passage system. "They're persistent," Morrison observed. "They have to be. If you survive to tell what really happened tonight, it exposes their entire operation." Chen began typing commands into her computer system, "which is why we need to move fast." She pulled up a new set of files, these containing detailed intelligence about the corruption network Rodriguez's team was part of. The scope was staggering. Weapons, equipment, and intelligence were being sold to multiple insurgent groups across 3 countries. American soldiers were dying because enemies were using American equipment and tactics against them. "We have enough evidence to bring down the entire network," Chen said. "But we need to get it to the right people who aren't compromised." Morrison studied the evidence, his tactical mind already working on how to use it effectively. "What's your plan?" Chen activated a secure satellite communication link and began entering coordinates. "There's a clean team operating out of Kandahar. People I trust who have been investigating this from a different angle. We get the evidence to them, and they can coordinate with military intelligence to roll up the entire network." "And Rodriguez's team?" Chen's smile was cold and dangerous. "We give them exactly what they deserve." Before Morrison could ask what she meant, alarm signals began flashing on multiple screens. Rodriguez's team had found something in the canyon that was making them very interested. On the surveillance feed, Morrison could see them examining the concealed entrance to the passage system. "They found the entrance," Morrison said. Chen was already moving, efficiently shutting down the non-essential equipment and gathering critical files. Then we moved to Phase 2, which is, we turn the hunters into the hunted. Chen led Morrison to a section of the cave he hadn't noticed before, where military-grade weapons and equipment were stored. She handed him a modern sniper rifle with advanced optics and a tactical vest loaded with ammunition and communication equipment. "What exactly are you proposing?" Morrison asked as he checked the rifle's action. Chen was gearing up with her own equipment, including a weapon system Morrison recognized as being beyond standard military issue. Rodriguez's team thinks they're hunting one injured man with limited resources. They're not prepared to face 2 highly trained soldiers with superior position, better equipment, and complete knowledge of their intentions. Morrison understood immediately. Chen wasn't proposing an escape. She was proposing an ambush. "You want to take them head on." "I want to end this tonight," Chen replied. "These men have betrayed their country, gotten good soldiers killed, and tried to murder their commanding officer. They don't deserve the courtesy of a trial." Morrison felt a surge of anger as he thought about all the ways Rodriguez, Thompson, and Williams had violated their oaths. But his training also told him that taking justice into his own hands could have serious consequences. What about the evidence? If we kill them, we lose the opportunity to interrogate them and find out who else is involved. Chen activated a recording device and attached it to Morrison's tactical vest. We get what information we can, then we finish this. The evidence we already have is enough to start rolling up the network. Rodriguez's team are foot soldiers, not the masterminds. As they prepared to leave the cave through a different exit, Chen handed Morrison a detailed map of the mountain area with tactical positions marked. I've been studying their movement patterns for weeks. They have training and equipment, but they're arrogant. They think they're hunting a desperate man who's making mistakes. Morrison studied the map, his tactical mind automatically identifying ambush points and fields of fire. Where do we hit them? Chen pointed to a narrow passage between two ridges. They'll have to come through here if they want to follow our trail. It's a natural choke point, and I've already prepared fighting positions with clear sight lines. As they moved through the cave system toward their ambush position, Morrison found himself reassessing everything he thought he knew about military service and brotherhood. The men who had tried to kill him weren't just traitors. They were active enemies of everything he had spent his life defending. The exit from the cave system brought them onto a ridge overlooking the passage Chen had identified. Morrison could see immediately why she had chosen this location. It provided excellent concealment for defenders while forcing attackers to cross open ground with limited cover. Chen began setting up her sniper position with practiced efficiency, her movements revealing extensive training in long-range precision shooting. Morrison positioned himself to cover the approaches to her location, creating a crossfire that would be devastating for anyone caught in the passage below. Contact, Chen whispered, pointing to movement on the far ridge. Morrison spotted Rodriguez's team emerging from the canyon, moving in tactical formation as they followed the trail toward the passage. Even through his scope, Morrison could see the grim determination on their faces. They intended to finish what they had started, regardless of the cost. Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio frequency Morrison's damaged equipment could still receive. Thompson, take the high ground and provide overwatch. Williams, you're with me. We end this tonight. Morrison watched as his former teammates deployed exactly as Chen had predicted. Thompson moved to a position that would give him a clear view of the passage, while Rodriguez and Williams prepared to advance through the choke point. They were walking directly into the trap Chen had prepared. Range to Thompson? Morrison whispered. 600 meters, Chen replied, her voice calm and professional. Rodriguez and Williams will be in the kill zone in approximately 90 seconds. Morrison felt a strange sense of calm settle over him as he prepared for combat. This wasn't like the confusion and betrayal of the compound. This time, he knew exactly who the enemy was and what needed to be done. Rodriguez's team entered the passage with weapons ready, moving in a tactical formation that would have been impressive under normal circumstances. But they were advancing toward an enemy who knew their every move and had prepared accordingly. Chen's rifle fired first. The suppressed shot barely audible, but devastating in its effect. Thompson's head snapped back as the bullet found its mark, and he crumpled behind his position without a sound. The shot had been perfectly placed, eliminating the threat before Thompson could even realize he was under attack. Rodriguez and Williams reacted immediately, diving for cover as they tried to identify the source of the shot. But they had walked into a carefully prepared kill zone, and Morrison was already adjusting his aim for his first target. Williams was closer, and Morrison's shot caught him center mass as he tried to find concealment behind a boulder that was too small to provide adequate protection. Morrison felt no satisfaction as he watched the medic who had saved so many lives fall victim to his own betrayal. Rodriguez was the most dangerous of the three, with the most experience and the best tactical instincts. He had found adequate cover and was systematically scanning for targets, his weapon ready to return fire as soon as he identified a threat. Rodriguez, Morrison called out, his voice echoing through the passage. The man who had betrayed him froze, recognizing Morrison's voice despite the tactical situation. You're supposed to be dead. Disappointed? Morrison replied, keeping Rodriguez pinned down while Chen adjusted her position for a clear shot. Rodriguez's laugh was bitter and full of regret. You never could leave well enough alone, could you? Always asking questions, always digging deeper. You forced us to make this choice. Nobody forced you to betray your country, Morrison replied. That was a choice you made for money. You don't understand the bigger picture, Rodriguez called back. There are things happening that are beyond your clearance level. We were trying to protect American interests. Chen's voice came through Morrison's earpiece. Clear shot available. Morrison made a decision that went against every instinct he had about justice and military law. But he thought about all the good soldiers who had died because of Rodriguez's betrayal, and about all the families who would never know the truth about what had happened to their loved ones. Take it, Morrison said quietly. Chen's second shot was as precise as her first. Rodriguez's body went still behind his inadequate cover, and the mountain passage fell silent, except for the wind blowing through the rocks. Morrison and Chen maintained their positions for several minutes, making sure there were no additional threats. Only when they were certain the immediate area was secure did they move down to examine the results of their ambush. Rodriguez was still alive when Morrison reached him, though barely. The man who had been his communication specialist, who had saved their unit during that firefight in Kandahar, looked up at Morrison with eyes that were already beginning to lose focus. "The families," Rodriguez whispered, blood frothing at his lips. "My daughters, they'll never understand." Morrison knelt beside the dying man, feeling a complicated mixture of anger and pity. "You should have thought about that before you decided to become a traitor." Rodriguez's hand moved weakly toward his pocket, and Morrison helped him retrieve a small device that looked like a modified radio transmitter. "Dead man's switch," Rodriguez managed to say. "If I don't check in, other operations get activated." Morrison's blood ran cold as he realized that Rodriguez's death might trigger additional attacks on other potential witnesses. How do we stop it? But Rodriguez's eyes had already gone empty, taking his secrets with him to the grave. Chen appeared beside Morrison, having finished checking Thompson and Williams. "Both dead. We need to search them for intelligence before we move." They spent the next 20 minutes systematically gathering every piece of equipment and documentation Rodriguez's team had been carrying. Chen's experience in intelligence gathering was evident as she efficiently catalogued everything that might provide clues about the larger conspiracy. "We have a problem," Chen said as she examined Rodriguez's communication equipment. "This transmitter has been sending regular status updates to someone. If they don't receive the next scheduled transmission, it could trigger emergency protocols." Morrison looked at the device Rodriguez had died trying to warn him about. "How long do we have?" Chen checked the timestamp on the last transmission. 6 hours, maybe less. Morrison felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders once again. The immediate threat from Rodriguez's team was eliminated, but the larger conspiracy was still active and dangerous. Other soldiers could be walking into similar traps at this very moment, unaware that their trusted teammates had been compromised. "We need to get that evidence to your contact in Kandahar," Morrison said. Chen was already activating her satellite communication system. "Already working on it, but it's going to take time to verify our intelligence and coordinate a response." Morrison looked down at the bodies of men who had once been his brothers in arms. Despite everything they had done, despite the betrayal and the attempts on his life, seeing them dead still affected him deeply. These were men he had trusted, men whose families he knew, men who had once been honorable soldiers. "Any regrets?" Chen asked, as if reading his thoughts. Morrison considered the question carefully. "About stopping them? No. About what they became. Yes." Chen began the process of securely transmitting their evidence to her contacts, while Morrison kept watch for any additional threats. The mountains were quiet now, but he knew that somewhere out there, other elements of the conspiracy were still active. As the first light of dawn began to appear over the mountain peaks, Morrison realized that his ordeal was far from over. Rodriguez's team had been eliminated, but they were just one small part of a much larger and more dangerous network. The real fight was just beginning. But for the first time since this nightmare began, Morrison wasn't facing it alone. Chen had proven herself to be exactly the kind of ally he needed. Skilled, dedicated, and absolutely committed to seeing justice done. The legendary female sniper had indeed rescued him, but Morrison was beginning to understand that the rescue was just the beginning of a much larger mission. Together, they would hunt down every person involved in the conspiracy that had nearly cost him his life, and had already cost the lives of too many good soldiers. The sun rose over the Afghan mountains, casting long shadows across a battlefield where justice had been served and brotherhood had been both betrayed and redeemed. Morrison's war was far from over, but he was no longer fighting it alone.